Y'all been waiting a long time for this video and I'm here to deliver it now. Today we are here to talk about how I learned Blender. So let's jump in, let's do it. Hello there, my name is Danielle and welcome to Danny is Cozy. I'm Danny and it's real cozy over here. I am here after a very long time finally bring you this video called How I Learned Blender. I want to share the step-by-step process of my first couple days of using the software, how I got acclimated, how I started, got into it, all that. I'm gonna make this video as short and as sweet and as simple to digest as I possibly can, but there is a lot of information in this video. I do encourage you to watch until the end because I'm sharing a lot of stuff with you. And I really do want to help. And one last thing before we get started, I would absolutely love it if you subscribed because I do want to make YouTube my main-ish platform. I want to share a lot of the artwork and mainly focus on that on Instagram. And on YouTube, I want to talk about Blender. I want to do some blend with me videos. I want to do vlogs. I want to do hair stuff, makeup, whatever. Just so that way this platform doesn't become something that I'm only boxing myself into art, because as much as I love art, I do want to talk about other stuff and I want to make other content. Now that we've gotten all that beginning stuff out of the way, let's jump right into the disclaimer. I know that the Blender community can get quite protective of the way that we learn Blender and of our methods and of our art, because I get it, it's our baby, it's our collective child. But I am a firm believer in the ideology that there is no correct way to learn anything. If you are getting the information down and you feel fulfilled, then that is totally great. That's perfect. If you're understanding accurate information, you and the person next to you don't have to learn it in the same way. Do you see what I'm saying? This is the way that I learn Blender, and if it's helpful for you, obviously that's what I want. I want to be helpful. But if it doesn't work for you, that's totally okay. There are so many different ways of learning. Everything in this video is a suggestion. All right, let's talk about phase one. Phase one is what I like to call the onboarding stage, the initiation. All right, so let's start. I did not choose to learn Blender with the donut. I watched like maybe 3 or 4 minutes of it and I found that it wasn't for me for a multitude of reasons, because I knew that for me there was a better way. And in fact, over this first and second day while I was making my first render, I really didn't use YouTube at all. And I'll explain why that ended up being a good decision in phase 3, because it makes sense to tie it all together there. So since I felt like there had to be a better way, I went on the Blender website and I just happened to stumble across the Blender documentation manual. And I was like, oh, okay, this is probably gonna help me be able to get through a smooth downloading process for the software. I was wrong. That was the textbook of Blender. That was the syllabus that I was looking at, okay? And it was and still is the greatest resource for Blender artists of all time. And I'll say it forever. So day one, which is a Saturday, I sat down and cover to cover wrote everything that was in that manual, everything. I had this notebook, this college ruled notebook about yay high, filled with Blender information from that book. And effectively, I just created my own dictionary for Blender at that point. It was written in my own words. I had put it all down in a way that really made sense to me and it flowed logically. And on top of that, the Blender manual is ordered in the exact way that you should learn Blender. The reason that this helps so much is because a lot of people initially get stuck on the interface and then either give up, or you're just spending so much time trying to figure out where everything is going. It's like, it ends up being overwhelming to even start. Now, reading the Blender manual and having all the information in your back pocket cuts down the initiation process to basically nothing. At the time I actually did open up the software, I was able to just go right in and say, okay, here's where my modifiers are. Up here looks like the outliner where all of my objects in the scene are. Down here is my timeline. This workspace area is the scene. That's the default cube. That's the sun. You know what I mean? I was able to go in there and understand what was going on pretty much right away. And if there was a place that I didn't know how to navigate to, or if there was something that I didn't understand, I just went back to my notes, I went back to the manual and got the information, and boom, it was there. So all that time of needing to figure out where everything was at was so quick and so short. So I was able to jump right in and start making objects and understanding what was going on the same day. Now, the most important thing that you need to know for phase one is your hotkeys, okay? You need to start working on these right away. Hotkeys are completely necessary for you to be able to do projects. Seriously, they are. So I found a list of a bunch of common Blender hotkeys and I just got to work on that list. I copied it all into my notebook and I even used hotkeys that were in the Blender manual. All right, now that you've built up your own Blender dictionary, you have that manual at the ready and you wrote down all the information that you want out of it, you are now ready to move on to phase two. Phase 2 is all about hands-on learning and calculated trial and error, okay? Calculated, and we'll talk about what that means. This is where you for real just get down to the nitty-gritty. And I'll never forget this, the very first hotkey I used was pressing tab to get into edit mode. Boom, step 1 complete. I knew what edit mode was because of the Blender manual, and I knew that that's how you start to manipulate objects. And manipulating objects is called modeling. Here's what I was doing. I was taking objects from everyday life. For example, let's talk about my laptop, and let's talk about my phone. In their most rudimentary form, these are just rectangles. That's it. A laptop is simply just 2 rectangles that come together and fold apart. That's all they do. I started looking at things like this as their most fundamental shapes. So the very first thing I ended up modeling was a laptop, and I did it like this. This is how the logic went in my head. Stick with me, okay? I know that I need to make 2 rectangles. What do I already have in this scene? There's a cube, there's a camera, and there's a light source. To turn this cube into a rectangle, I simply need to flatten it and make it wider. Now, in order to flatten this cube, I know I need to scale it. So I'm gonna press S, and I know that the top and bottom need to come closer together. So I'm going to scale it along the Z axis. So I'm going to press S and Z, and I'm gonna move my mouse, and I'm gonna see what happens. Boom, it was flat. So I'm like, all right, step 1 complete. Now I know that I need to make this a little bit wider so it's an actual rectangle. So I'm going to scale it along the X axis. There was the rectangle. Then all I did was duplicate that rectangle, rotate one of them, and boom, there was a laptop. Was it beautiful? No. Did it look perfect? No. Was it the most basic, rudimentary laptop in the world? Absolutely. But was it a laptop? I did the exact same thing again with a house. Put a cube in a scene, I duplicated a cube, made it a little bit bigger, shrunk the top face until it came together like that, boom, a house. I even got a little bit crazy and put a door on it. No windows though, because I didn't know how to do that yet. Then to make my phone, all I did was put another cube in a scene, do the exact same thing I did with the laptop, and boom, there was a phone. You see what I'm saying about making things in their most basic form just so you can get the hang of how to combine things to make other things? You can worry about adding details later, you can worry about getting more realistic or more stylized later, but for now, you're getting the hang of just putting things together. So that's what I did. And here's really where the prefrontal cortex started just working. The wheels were turning, because things started making sense at that point. Now, I was taking the information I had about modeling and combining that with the information that I had about modifiers. I was throwing every single modifier on top of every single object, okay? Some of them worked well, some of them didn't work well. Some of them were compatible, some of them weren't. And I got to learn a lot of information that way. Now, I kept a log of all of this, okay? Whenever I did something that I wanted to be able to replicate, I wrote it down. And I wrote it down like this: object plus action equals result. For a really basic example, cube plus tab equals edit mode cube. For example, object plus hotkey H equals hidden object. And I wrote down a bunch of other stuff while I tried different things out, and that enabled me to create a backlog of information, because if I wanted to replicate something, I knew how I did it because I wrote it down. Or if I wanted to avoid something, I knew what not to do because I wrote it down. Now at this point, I genuinely just tried every single hotkey that I knew. I tried all the modifiers out. I tried just a ton of stuff until I figured out what looked aesthetically pleasing to me. And now let's get into phase 3. Now, phase 3 is day 2.5 of my first 3 days of using Blender. This is when I made my first render completely on my own. I had so much information in my brain, in the Blender manual, in the notebook, and I used all that to make a Nintendo Switch. This Nintendo Switch, to be exact. And here's how I did that. Keep in mind, I did not do this then the way I would do this now, of course. It took me a good couple of hours, whereas now I would be able to make this in like 5 minutes or less. All this is a rectangle with beveled edges. That's all this is. So I made that same rectangle from the laptop, a little thicker and a little cuter. The screen I can see here is just an inset face. A lot of people say insert face, but it's actually inset. And it's fine if you say insert, nobody really cares. For the controllers, I just made a square, split it in half, which was not the way, again, that I would do this now. And I pushed it right up against the rectangle, and boom, there was a Nintendo Switch. To make the buttons, I just subdivided a cube. To make the plus and minus, I did that in a really complicated way that was not, it didn't make any sense. And does this look like a perfect Nintendo Switch? No, it definitely does not look perfect. But for somebody who had been using Blender for only 2 days, that was pretty solid. And I want you to keep in mind that this was like a rainy college weekend where I had a lot of time on my hands, okay? After that, I had only been using Blender. I used Blender multiple hours a day, every single day, and I did not miss a day for months. I blended during lunch, I blended before bed, I blended in my dorm, I blended while I was hanging out with friends all the time. Every single time I got a chance to be using Blender, I was. And I'm not at all saying that you have to do that or that you should do that. I do not recommend doing that. Give yourself a break from it. I ended up putting so much pressure on myself doing that yes, I was putting things out, but was I really looking at the finer details? Was I trying to learn how to make things quicker for myself? No, I wasn't doing any of that. And now, here's where I want to bring it back to phase 1, where I said I would be mentioning that thing in phase 3. I said during phase 1 that I didn't really watch any YouTube videos while I was learning Blender. For me, that ended up being a good plan because I was able to familiarize myself with everything before going on YouTube and learning somebody else's workflow. So I wasn't just sitting there going in completely blind. So I didn't need to do the thing where you rewind a bunch of times in order to figure out what's going on. And if somebody left out a bit of information, I was sort of mostly able to fill in the gaps. But if I started watching videos as a complete beginner, I'm not sure if they would have been as helpful. But by the time I already built up my knowledge base, they were very helpful. Through YouTube videos, I learned how to speed up my workflow. I learned even more about lighting. I learned even more about shading. I learned about geometry nodes on YouTube. And those videos really helped me hone in my skills and get to where I wanted to be. Just because Blender videos are very fast, a lot of people don't explain why they're doing things, and I think the most important thing to understand in Blender is why am I doing this? So I was able to sort of figure out why since I had a little bit of knowledge built up. Now fast forward to maybe 2 or 3 months into my Blender journey. I'd already made a bunch of stuff. I was feeling pretty confident in my skills. And this part is completely optional. If you want to do this, if you have the means, if you have the ability, absolutely, I would highly recommend it. But it is not at all necessary. I ended up actually purchasing the picnic table course from Nicky Blender on her Gumroad, and I loved that course. I learned more about her style, which really resonated with me. I learned more about lighting, I learned more about shading, and all that stuff was, the information I got in that course was genuinely very helpful. And it definitely guided me in the right direction, but again, you do not need to purchase anything to learn Blender. Blender is free, it's meant to be accessible. Art by Tran has great videos on YouTube for people who are wanting to learn the more cozy style, but I also recommend Polygon Runway. 3D by Sarah makes great videos as well. And once you've gained a little bit of knowledge about Blender, you should 100% be going in and watching other artists create what they create. You should be learning about their workflow, you should be learning about how they make their projects so fast, and it'll help you start to develop your own style as you see what pleases you aesthetically. Then the only thing you can do from there is just keep on blending. That's the only thing you can do. Now my last bit of advice is yesterday was the best day to start, tomorrow is the worst. Which basically means that you're going to be saying, I'll start tomorrow, I'll start tomorrow, I'll start tomorrow, for the rest of your life if you don't just get up and do it. And then tomorrow you will be looking back on yesterday and saying, you finally started. Do with that what you will. I believe in you, I think you got this. If you have any questions at all about anything, even if you just want to ask me what my favorite color is, 100% ask me. I respond to everybody and I'm more than happy to talk about Blender at any time. So that's all I have to say today. If you enjoyed this video, please give me a thumbs up and subscribe. I will see you in the next video, which I already have on the docket. Don't worry, it's definitely coming. It won't be another 8 months. Okay, love you. Bye.